Hello, and welcome to Informed Dissent. This is your news of the week for the week of February 28th, 2026. Kansas has enacted a new law requiring all state-issued identification documents, including driver's licenses and birth certificates, to reflect an individual's sex, not their gender identity. The law took effect February 26th after a Republican supermajority overrode Democratic Governor Laura Kelly's veto. The Federal Bureau of Prisons announced it will end cross-sex hormones, transition surgeries, and social accommodations for more than 1,000 inmates diagnosed with gender dysphoria, replacing those interventions with psychotherapy and psychiatric treatment. In a striking contradiction, the Bureau's own general counsel acknowledged the agency remains legally bound by federal injunction requiring continued hormone treatment and social accommodations under pre-existing policy. The New York Times opinion section published a major critique by journalist Jesse Singal examining how medical organizations relied on internal consensus rather than independent evidence when developing pediatric gender treatment guidelines. Yet despite the significance of these findings, the piece appeared in the opinion pages rather than the paper's investigative newsroom. New research published in Psychform Academic Archive found that many gay male college students experience what researchers term conditional belonging in LGBT institutional environments. 86% reported feeling pressure to conform to gender identity ideology, and many described psychological strain the study called integrity fatigue. Wow, there's a lot of news today. In Canada, a human rights tribunal ordered former school trustee Barry Newfield to pay $750,000 after ruling that public criticism of gender identity policies constituted unlawful discrimination. Wow, Canada. Observers say it represents one of the largest financial penalties ever imposed in a speech-related human rights proceeding. And joining us this week to help unpack how these shifts are playing out in the world of sports and media is Dan Zaksheske. Dan is a reporter at Outkick and has covered trans-identifying athletes in women's sports for about 2.5 years. He has appeared on Fox News and FoxNews.com, and his reporting has been cited in congressional correspondence to the U.S. Secretary of Defense. He has traveled across the country to tell the stories of girls affected when males enter women's sports and spaces, reporting on the rules and policy shifts shaping competition and what they mean for fairness, safety, and opportunity for women and girls. And now, onto the show. Somebody say hi.
Hi, welcome to Informed Dissent. This is Saturday, February the 28th. It's the last day of February. This is such a short month.
Today's the last day of February. Wow.
It's like 3 days shorter than every other month. It's not that. That's it.
It feels very short.
They cut, it used to be 28 days and they cut it down to 27.
No, okay. My name is Jamie Reed. I am a whistleblower from a pediatric gender center, and Corey is looking incredibly dapper today for those who are just listening.
Yeah, the beret is killer, Corey. It's killer.
Where do you store all of your hats?
You need a baguette. You need to just hold a baguette.
I try not to look too French.
The black turtleneck, black.
Yeah. I don't need a baguette. I need a cigarette.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Who are you?
Me. I am somebody who, as a teenager, thought that I could become a woman, and as a grown-ass adult, realized that that was impossible. And so now I talk about it, and I try to prevent other young people from having permanent body changes that will eliminate certain futures that other people get to enjoy. What about you, Lauren?
I'm just over here being love and joy
Oh, do
every
you have
single day.
a 500 word uh, profile that you'd like to go through and tell us more?
Not yet, but it's coming. It's coming.
It is
How,
coming.
how are your Reiki master instruction classes going?
Great.
Good, good.
Actually, don't joke about that. I actually did do Reiki instruction when I was a massage therapist for like a year until I realized that I don't like touching naked strangers because they're gross.
Fair enough.
Short-lived career.
I used to be a psychic, so I'm not gonna hold that against you.
Yes, Corey's former internet presence was Miss Cleo, if you're not familiar.
But it was, well, anyway, it's a true story,
Okay.
but let's not get into
Can
it.
we jump into the
Wait,
news?
what? You used to really be a psychic?
Yeah, yeah,
Wait, seriously?
yeah, seriously.
What do you mean?
There was so all right, I guess we're getting into this, and then we'll get into the other stuff.
Yeah, no, our listeners want to hear about your stint as a medium. Thank you.
It's funny you say Miss Cleo because there was a company in Northern Nevada when I was just out of high school that handled the call center overflow for the adult lines and for the psychic lines. And I had already started my transition at that point, and they wanted to train me to do the adult lines. And I didn't really want to, but I took the training. And before the training was over, so a couple of the managers pulled me aside and they said, "We have to ask, are you male?" I said, "Yeah." And they said, "We can't have you doing the adult lines," because they had gotten in trouble a couple of years before and sued because they had a man working the adult lines. Um, and so they put me on the psychic line, which is what I had wanted to be doing anyway, because that's what my friends did. I had friends who worked for them doing the psychic stuff. And so I read tarot cards for a 900 number for 3 or 4 months when I was 18.
Wow.
Do you know how to read tarot
Yeah, you're
cards?
totally reading our tarots on the next
Yeah.
episode. Yeah.
Do you have a set of cards?
No, I I think that people who read tarot, I think this is a common cultural thing, but occasionally you'll have a deck that somebody that you know will touch it and it works really well for them. And you sort of have a spiritual obligation to move the deck forward to the person who's reading it really well. And so I don't have any decks. All my decks have moved away. You could say I'm deckless. What?
So, can we order you a deck?
No, no, no. That's a part of my past that I don't need to return to.
Oh, wow. Okay. Um, can I tell you about the week in the world of the gender culture wars?
I think we should do a quick listener poll. Would you rather hear more about Corey's career as a psychic, or would you like to hear more about gender?
Yeah, leave your comments. And
I
we'll
still want Corey
and
to read our cards, though.
yeah, and then if listeners, if you decide that we should dramatically shift to being a psychic medium podcast, please let us know. I am more than willing.
Do you want me to do the quick answering the phone call? How that went? You want to hear
Oh,
that really quick?
oh my God,
No,
please, yes.
can
Yes,
we,
no,
oh
please do
my
it.
God. I
Please do it.
really want to talk about the new, okay.
It goes like this. Thank you for calling the psychic advisor. My name is Corinna. Could I have your date of birth, please?
I don't want to say it live because I'm afraid someone will dox me.
It's fine. So then I would talk about people's astrological sign and warm them up a little bit with like, why are you calling today? And all that sort of stuff. And then I'd give a psychic reading for up to 20 minutes before the call would automatically end because that was the regulation.
Oh, you could only charge them for 20 minutes of time?
Yeah, yeah, because that was $60 to $80 worth of billing charges that would show up on your bill.
Wow.
And it was mostly people. Well, anyway, let's talk about gender.
Okay.
We don't need to talk about sex.
Okay. So, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of my week in the world of gender, and then we can figure out what we want to talk more about. So on Monday, there was like a day long um, D-Trans like conference, Zoom conference put on by Corey, your friend Kinnan McKinnon.
Oh, great.
Yeah. It was very interesting. It was came out of the MAD Studies program.
What does
Um,
MAD stand for?
it doesn't stand it's they're like
No,
literally
they're talking about crazy people, like mad,
yeah,
like crazy. It's not an acronym. They're talking about crazy people.
I
yeah,
thought crazy studies psychology.
they're tying in like MAD with trans and detrans. Um,
Oh, great.
yeah, it was
Also, time is bad.
okay. Well, I'll get to the time being bad
Okay.
part.
Yeah,
I'm actually gonna write a Substack post about kind of my experience of this day. Um, I will just read you this quote from one of the researchers that presented, just so you know, kind of where they were going. The quote is, "We also looked at the experiences of detransitioners and applied or looked at it through the lens of crypt theory." So crypt theory works at the intersection of disability justice, queer studies, challenging society's culture of compulsory heterosexuality, able-bodiedness, and able-mindedness. And they looked at it through the lens of crypt time, which is the temporal framework that challenges the notions of linear time.
Okie doke.
Let's go back to the psychic stuff. I feel like
Yeah,
that's
let's.
better grounded.
It is. It's a little more grounded in reality
Yeah.
than these people getting their PhDs in
Um, so that
nonsense
was my
talk.
Monday. So that was my Monday. And then Jesse Singal put out a piece in the New York Times.
Oh,
He teased about it the day before it came out. He said something big is coming. I think he just really wanted to rile up all of his fans on Blue Sky. Um, put out the piece. It was an opinion piece, but I'm not quite sure what part of it was an opinion.
Yeah, that would
And
be my biggest issue with this is that they continuously build these critical investigative pieces as opinion pieces in the New York Times.
well, what was it about?
It was about there no longer being a medical consensus around pediatric gender transition and kind of taking apart the fact that there's really no evidence.
I see. So I think I read Jesse's piece, and one of the things that he claimed in it is that he's left leaning, right? So he wanted to put that credential up that he's not a right wing person and that he's been following this issue for a long time, which I think that's true. I think is in terms of people who have journalist credentials, he's been one of the people who's been following this beat probably the longest, at least most consistently. And he also claimed that anybody who looks into this critically and tries to provide any sort of neutral analysis gets called a bigot.
then he got called a bigot again,
Mhm.
Yeah,
over and
in
over.
fact, there were calls for his death, numerous calls for his death on Blue Sky, which, if I'm the authorities in Europe, I see that sort of thing, and I would say that's a platform that should be shut down completely because it's breeding extremism. They just have to wait for Elon Musk to buy it before they do anything.
One of the interesting parts about Jesse Singal's piece was that they opened up the comments, and there were
Briefly,
briefly,
for about
yes,
2 hours.
yes, and you have to do a mad scurry dash. There were 712 comments, and Lauren, you had an interesting thought about the comments section. What did you notice?
So there are different tabs in the comments section. There's an all, so you get all of the comments. There's a reader reviewed tab where they're upvoted by the reader as the most popular. And then there's a tab that says from the New York Times. And I notice when toggling between them, if you go from the reader reviewed or upvoted ones, most of them are extremely critical about pediatric gender medicine. There was even one personal account from a mother who had a young lesbian daughter, um, proto-gay kid at 11, claim a trans identity, and she talks about how they wanted to put her on puberty blockers within the first appointment. Luckily, the kid desisted and is now a happy, healthy young lesbian. Um, and then under the from the New York Times tab, most of those comments were basically number one, either misinformation or directly attacking Jesse's stance as like he's a bigot. Jesse was given the opportunity to reply to those comments, so at least it wasn't just here, this is what, like, to me it looked like what the New York Times wanted to present was all of these people who have objections to this. But if you look at the reader reviewed comments, it far out the people who are critical of pediatric gender medicine far outweigh the people who are rabidly in support of it. So I just thought that that was interesting. I wonder if the New York Times is in the background deliberately like curating these particular comments to kind of smooth over the fact that they published this piece, because we all know that there's a lot of internal conflict there. I don't know. I just thought it was interesting, the stark difference between the reader reviewed upvoted ones and the ones the New York Times
Highlighted.
highlighted. Yeah.
So I think the third most upvoted comment was really important. The one about the butch lesbian daughter is the fourth most voted upvoted, but the third one is Kathy from, oh, I'm gonna slaughter this, Hoboken, New Jersey. Help me out here.
Yeah, it's Hoboken.
Hoboken. Okay. My daughter told me she was a boy in November 2020 when she was 13. Our family was put through a living hell because these medical associations all kept backing each other up and censoring common sense questions. Let the world be put on notice that we, the parents, aren't forgetting that this happened, and we will be holding accountable those who hurt our children and our families.
Wow.
And that was the third most upvoted comment.
Here, here. Good for her.
Yeah. Um, I mean, I asked Jesse like where the ones that the New York Times picked, they did pick those for him to reply to, and he was able to pick a couple on his own too. I think a lot of people saw this as a big win. Um, yeah, that was the big story of the New York Times.
Yeah, it's tough
Um,
to say what it is though, because yeah, I saw a lot of people on Twitter saying this is a big win, like more people are being exposed to it. But the thing that they have in their back pocket to object is that this was an opinion piece. This wasn't investigative journalism. This wasn't in the science section. This is just an opinion. And the New York Times has the ability to take this out of the opinion section.
Do they?
They do. And they refuse to do that. I mean, they just keep these articles just keep ending up in the
well,
opinion section. And I think it's so that they can say, well, it's just an opinion. We're just whatever. But you don't see these articles in the science section. Like they don't lend the credence to the argument by always putting it in the opinion section.
oh my God, sorry, I have a tickle in my throat.
I mean,
So,
maybe I'm just being picky, but I just feel like it's so frustrating to see every critique, every valid critique that where, Jesse is like compulsive about citations and checking sources, and still it was billed as an opinion piece.
Well, what's funny-ish is that uh, in the Washington Post a couple of years ago, one of the pieces that covered the Ohio um, ban on medical procedures featured an interaction with me that was completely made up, and the whole piece itself was just basically a puff piece about my old friend Carrie Callahan, and that was news. That was news.
Right.
So
Right. That's what I mean. I mean,
Well, if we're going to say opinion pieces are, not worthy of anything, then the major hit piece that the stupid Kansas City Pitch published this week on me, I'm just going to write off. Why am I coughing? So sorry. Um, yeah, I don't know if it's even worth talking about any further.
I saw
Apparently,
what was the outlet again?
the Kansas City Pitch, it's like one of those alt newspapers, that used to be in every big city where you used to
Oh
pick it
yeah,
up to like find out who's coming to the concert venue near you
right. They stopped
and to
publishing
read
those
the
because
Dan Savage
yeah,
section in the back.
our generation was the last one that could read, so they stopped publishing it quickly.
Yeah, so
yes.
somebody put out a giant hit on me that included somehow I'm responsible for the rainbow flags coming down at Stonewall. Like,
Yep.
Yeah.
All your fault. Definitely your fault.
okay, so can we talk about what happened for every Kansan on Thursday?
Yes, I think we should.
Every Kansan?
Well,
Well, subset.
1,700 Kansans on Thursday, including Matthew Moe and Daniel Doe.
Matt Moe and Dan Doe.
Are we okay? Mo and Doe, go.
Well,
Oh,
the ACLU the ACLU has to give them
yeah. So
pseudonyms when they sue, or they get to give them pseudonyms when they sue.
yeah.
Okay. Can I give you a brief history? Do you know what happened here?
No.
Let me share for the readers, not readers. Okay. This is what happened. The state of Kansas passed a new law, very, very recently. This was in early 2026. Kansas enacted a House substitute for Senate Bill 244. It required two things. One of the things that the ACLU is coming after them for is it's not a single issue law, which a couple states have that requirement. So it required state issued identification to reflect sex assigned at birth. And it also has an interesting bathroom section that we maybe should talk about in the future. So they voted it, they passed it, then the governor vetoed it, and then they overrode her veto. Um, and it went into effect on Thursday. So the law took effect February 26, 2026. And one of the rightful complaints is that you probably shouldn't send out a letter that says, just FYI, your driver's license will be invalid on Thursday.
Yeah, I feel like they were better. And not that I'm not in
Better
support
way.
of the bill, but I do think that they could have made this a little bit less harsh. They could have sent out a form and said, fill this out, your new ID will be sent to you. They could have, like you said, they could have sent them a pass and say, skip the line at the DMV when you go. You have 6 months to change your ID. I mean, I feel like those criticisms of the bill are valid. Like if I got a letter in the mail that said your driver's license, for whatever reason, is invalid tomorrow, I'd be very upset because everyone in America knows going to the DMV requires a lot of patience. You need to be in your best possible mental state, and you need to have 16 hours free that day. So I get it. I think the criticism of it in that respect is valid, but I also think it's absolutely ridiculous that anyone has IDs that don't reflect their birth sex. From inception, it was a bad idea.
Okay, so can I do this before we go into Kansas more? I want to give you both, I want to give listeners and the both of you like this overview of where we're at in the US on the states around your identification. So, and for listeners who are not in the United States, like we have multiple different documents that we use as our identification. Some of us on a day-to-day basis, some of us like never. Um, so I think we've talked about this before. All three of us have a passport, but not every American does. And it does take a lot. It's a lot of work to get a passport. You have to go get the little photo taken. You got to submit all this documentation. It costs some money. It takes months and months and months. You cannot quickly get a passport here.
And I think you have to be a citizen.
Oh, well,
You do.
sorry. I was making that as an assumption. I'm assuming that we're talking about American citizens moving forward with this
Okay.
documentation discussion.
All right. I just mentioned it because there are a lot of residents in America who do have other forms of documentation, legal state issued documentation, but they cannot have passports or they cannot have US passports.
Yeah.
They can have foreign passports.
Okay.
Did we look at this before? I don't think there's a sex marker on your passport, is there?
Yes.
There is? Okay. I've never looked that closely at it.
Wait, I have it right here because I'm a weirdo who carries my passport. I know I'm not supposed to
Wait,
all
wait,
the
wait. Don't hold it. Don't hold it up to the screen.
I'm not going to.
Okay.
Don't want the little QR code on the back of it either that you're flashing. There you go.
Oh no, these are all the times that I get extra flagged for security. All these little stickers that keep getting put on. Anyway, yes, the sex marker is on your passport and it says the word sex, not gender. Okay. So we have passports, we have birth certificates, we have social security cards, and we have driver's licenses and or state IDs. Okay. So as of right now, there are still 22 states plus the District of Columbia in which you can get either an M, an F, or an X on your driver's license.
With what requirements? I guess that's different in every state, or
I will explain that in a moment. Actually, I can explain it right now. In all of those, in every state that allows you to get an M, F, or an X, it is normally a single page form, and you do not have to get a doctor or another medical professional or psych professional to sign it. So that self is the word attestation.
Mhm.
Yep. That's right.
Okay. So self attestation, you can say you're an X and you get it on your driver's license, and all of the states that you would think that would do this do this. So Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, Colorado, New Mexico, Minnesota, Illinois, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and then basically the whole eastern seaboard. Okay. So then there are other states where you can get your M or your F changed on your driver's license, but a doctor has to sign the form to say that you can get it changed. So that's Ohio, North Dakota, Wyoming, North Carolina, Delaware. Okay. So then states that you can use the form, but that a doctor, like they limit which professionals could sign it, is Nebraska and West Virginia. And then we start getting more and more restrictions. So the state has no form, no court order, a proof of surgery required, but a burdensome process. Provider, it's harder to do. Um, is a smaller subset. That's Wisconsin, Idaho, Utah, Arizona. Um, then we move into the four states right now that are doing what Kansas just did this week, which is that they no longer allow the updating or changing of the sex marker on a driver's license. Um, Corey, Indiana is one of those states.
Yeah.
Tennessee,
I have a
Florida.
question. In these states, is there a clause in there that would apply to detransitioners?
Mm.
Not usually.
Like to you know what I mean? Like if
Right.
you're
But usually the terminology is not about who can change it or what the change can be. It's the terminology is usually this marker is your birth sex.
right, but if you've already been given an ID,
Right.
I'm assuming we're going to see more laws like Kansas saying you have to change it back.
Let's see.
Kansas is, oh, so, okay, so Kansas changed this law, and on Thursday, the law went into effect, and individuals started getting letters in the mail saying your driver's license is invalid. However, as far as I can tell, um, I'm not clear in Kansas if you had previously amended your birth certificate. So if your birth certificate says how to do this as an example. Um, let's go back to our friends, what, Mo and Joe? Who did I say?
Mo
These are
and Doe.
these are the real plaintiffs. Okay, so the letter went out. People freaked out. This is about 1,700 people. Um, so the ACLU sued today, I believe. Um, their lawsuit, they're representing two anonymous plaintiffs, both um, trans-identified women, both hold driver's license with male sex markers on them. Um, it will invalidate their driver's license. So if Daniel Doe, I believe, had already changed her birth certificate to say M, then her driver's license can remain saying M. I think what the state is sending out letters on is when they can see in the records that the birth certificate sex marker does not match the current driver's license sex marker, and or they have probably the stack of all of the signed forms that they use to go through the process in the first place. So they're backtracking on that whole process. Um, I found this really interesting, though, the ACLU's lawsuit against this law. Um, so these are the two individuals they're upholding as the plaintiffs who are, they're suing on behalf of. So Daniel Doe is an administrative associate at the University of Kansas whose job requires her to drive university vehicles twice a day. So somehow she feels like because she has to drive this university vehicle for her work, that this is going to be an undue burden on her because she presents to the world as male, as trans-identified female. The other, Matthew Moe, is a PhD student. I found this really, I almost found this funny. I mean, this is getting weird. Um, Matthew Moe is a PhD student who works at a local bar, and frequently she gets off at 3 a.m. And she feels like without her driver's license, she would be forced to bicycle home at unsafe hours. Now, she has the right to still have her driver's license. It just will have an F on it instead of an M. But she believes now she has to bicycle home instead of drive her car at 3 a.m. from the bar where she works.
Well, I think this is actually really bad policy. And you have to be really careful with policy because you've given these plaintiffs very strong grounds for a lawsuit. And the things that they're saying burden them, do burden them. If your state issued identification has become invalidated, not because of any law that you violated or policy that you violated, but because of some capricious action on behalf of the government. Like we're all supposed to be protected from capricious government acts. And if the policy were, hey, when we were saying this earlier, hey, when it comes time to renew your license, we're going to reset the sex marker to be your
Yeah.
then the burden would be very low on people. But this places a huge burden on people to have their IDs invalidated. And the worst case otherwise would have been, let's say, 5 or 6 years every 5 or 6 years to have your driver's license renewed. Like that would have been the easy way of doing it. But they've completely handed the state of Kansas completely handed the ACLU. Here's an extremely sympathetic cause because we're dumbasses, and the underlying arguments about whether this is a good policy or bad policy almost don't even matter now because the
Right.
means of delivering the policy were dumb.
Yeah.
And,
No,
and if
I
any of our
totally
friends
agree.
from Kansas that we know, I would say that to your face also.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it just, yeah, like I said, if I had got a letter in the mail saying tomorrow your driver's license is invalid and I, for my job, drove, I mean, I'm sure they need to have a valid driver's license.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, Kansas isn't
Otherwise,
exactly known for their friendly public transportation, so a lot of people in Kansas are driving cars. I think we really need to be careful with these laws. We need to really drill down on what the actual um, downstream effects of these bills are going to be when we pass them. Because, again, I think it's absolutely ludicrous that anybody was even ever allowed to change these sex markers. Like, this just seems like a completely ridiculous thing to have, like, a legally sanctioned lie on someone's formal identification. But that being the case, it was allowed, and you do have to always have to have some grace. Like people, it's a rough time to be an American right now. And if all of a sudden you wake up and you can't drive your car, um, yeah, I mean I agree with Corey. There was a better way to pass this bill, or at least they could have amended it so that it wasn't something that was so um kind of draconian in the way it was delivered. Because I agree, it does kind of give them plenty of ammunition to just call people bigots. It gives them plenty of ammunition to say, we're being treated as second class citizens. I
And
mean, there's no harm. What harm would it have been to give them a 6 month waiting period, or next time your license renews, you have to have an accurate sex marker. I mean, what would have actually been the harm there? I don't know. Because, we really do have to be careful because we don't want to give any credence to the fact that all of these laws are coming from a place of bigotry because they're not. They're not. But the way this was enacted, I think makes it look like it was meant to be punitive.
can I
Yes, go. Go.
just maybe disagree a little bit?
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, of
Um,
course.
this is a law, which means that it went through at least some element of a debate process and a negotiation period. And what I am afraid we're not taking into account is that um, I think that there's been this push on the activist side where they're just going to be a no, no, no. I'm in opposition, opposition, opposition. And maybe this is where a little bit of the onus is on the organizations in the state of Kansas who could have maybe said, we see that this is coming. We understand that you're going to do this. Let's, instead of just saying, we're just going to come out in complete opposition, why couldn't the negotiation platform been, is there a way to do this compassionately and slowly?
You know, we have seen in some cases, and I hope that this isn't exposing anything that shouldn't be said, but I'm just going to be true to myself here. We've seen cases where we've tried to get Democrats over and over into some of these conversations, and we've seen states where Republicans start off as being open to that idea. They want their Democratic colleagues to participate, and then they do one of these bills or two of these bills, and they find out that the Democrats are crazy. State like in every state, sorry, they find out that the Democrats are crazy on this issue, and then the third or fourth bill they go to, they say, no, we don't need the Democrats to pass this. We're not even going to talk to the Democrats.
Yeah, because they're not really
We don't
gonna
need
even
them.
talk to us. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's
And
it's
so the
a
Democrats have shut the door so many times. The Republicans said, we're just going to do whatever we want to now.
yeah,
That,
no, but
that
you're
probably
right,
happened
Jamie.
here.
If there was any kind of goodwill, they could have lessened the blow for their constituents if they really cared about these
If
people.
if they were at least willing to have the conversation, like, yes, like, okay, we need to have accurate sex markers on our identification in our state. They could have even, why it was, okay, a grandfather clause, or like Corey said, like your ID is up in a year's time. And again, this is where if it really is only 1,700 individuals in the state of Kansas, I do think that this is an administrative change. It could have been that the other party could have negotiated and said, let's make it so the people are sent the letter. They're given a special ticket that says you skip the line at the DMV when you come, or we do. This is also where the ACLU and GLAD and the on the ground LGBT orgs need to step up here. If why are they not saying like, okay, this is going to happen. Let's soften the blow and help our constituents.
They have a game theoretical reason not to do that, which is as soon as they start negotiating on these types of matters, the
Yeah.
the window keeps shifting, and they don't have a mechanism. They don't have a B plan. They only have the A plan. So there's no.
Well, it's time for Plan B here. It really is, people.
I've been saying that for years. When I had the ability to have direct messages with people like Aaron Reed and Alejandra Carabello and uh,
Woo
Ari
woo.
Drennan, and years ago, I said, "Look, the pendulum is coming the other way, and you should want to have it stop somewhere before all of your rights are gone. You should want to slow down the pendulum instead of putting energy into the pendulum. A slower, smoother pendulum is safer than a big, heavy, fast one." And they didn't believe me. They didn't think that they needed Plan B because they're in a tunnel vision. This is something that we need to be careful of ourselves, is when everybody around you confirms the thing that you want to believe, you have lost touch with reality. So the very best thing to do if you're doing anything strategic is and um, uh, sorry, I'm spinning here. You have to try to understand and have some sympathy for your opponents, because otherwise you're going to find yourself in an echo chamber.
Yeah, I think it's true. It's true both sides. Like the Democrats don't know what they don't know, and neither do the Republicans.
Yeah.
That's the thing is I do think that and unfortunately I think most people on either side are trying to do what they think is right, but also I think that both sides do not have the complete picture. So the left does not have the complete picture of the actual harms that this is doing to society. The right sees those harms, but doesn't really understand how we got here. So they are not really adequate in pulling it apart in the most politically salient way or even the most compassionate way because they don't really get it. I mean, some of them do. Some of them do. I definitely have talked to Republican reps that really, really get this issue. But and generally, those people are much more compassionate, and they do see um, a way forward that doesn't harm anyone or cause, like you said, undue burden to anyone. But like Corey, I think that was a really great point. Neither side is actually talking to each other. So you can't come to any like reasonable negotiation if no matter what you say, you're just being called a bigot, or no matter what you say, you're just being called a crazy person. So yeah, it's an unfortunate situation we find ourselves in this country, and I do have compassion for those people that woke up today and are not allowed to drive and are going to have to ride their bike.
They are not allowed to drive. You
They're
go
riding their
get,
bikes.
no, you go get, you,
Pegs for your bike wheels, and you can take your friend.
no, you, you have to go to the DMV and you get your new driver's license that reflects your birth sex on it.
Yes, that's what they will eventually need to do. But
Also,
that's not what they
Or
experience
you get one of
instantly.
those little segways or the little razor scooters. I think that'd be great.
okay, well, the ACLU has requested a temporary restraining order and a temporary injunction to stop the state from enforcing this law while the case is being decided.
Yep.
So, but also here, I think is that other almost, middle ground where, first of all, the New York Times did publish a story on this that our friend Amy Harmon wrote. Amy Harmon's new byline at the bottom also said, Amy Harmon covers how shifting conceptions of gender affect everyday life in the United States. That's her byline. Um, I think that this is going to become a court case. I think this is also where feminist orgs and other orgs who support this law and support these changes overall can weigh in and start saying things like, we want to see sex markers correct on identification. We need to do so in a manner that assists those who had their slow walked back.
Yeah.
I, I really don't care about the driver's license stuff. I don't see the whole point of I'd be just as happy to have that removed off of a license. The medical stuff that I testify on, I can easily justify it. The sports stuff, I can easily justify it. The Department of Corrections, even legal definitions of sex, I can easily justify all of that. The I don't want to spend, just me personally, I don't care about the IDs. It's hard for me to say, well, if we don't fix this, here are the problems. Because the core problem is not the ID. The core problem is that identity is allowed to be conflated with sex. That's the thing that has to be stopped. That's the harm, is
Yeah.
is eliminating the idea of sex. Um, I don't know. That's just me. I can see how they're connected, but
Corey, I kind of I mean, I sort of agree with you here. I think that legally speaking, no further birth certificate should be changed in this country regarding sex unless there is a true administrative error, which can occur.
can.
but no further birth certificates should be amended. Um, I also would agree with, I mean, I would agree with you. I don't necessarily see the need for a sex marker on a driver's license.
Listeners, comment if you have any insight into that, because I also don't really see why we need a sex marker on our driver's license.
What it the reason
Like I don't know when they would be checking. I don't
when
know. I
they
guess.
book you into jail.
Okay. Yeah. Well, see, that is important.
It doesn't have to be on your license. It still could be in your official record because that license isn't everything the state knows about you. It's just an identifier that can be used to figure out that, like your driver's license ID. That goes to all sorts of records. And when they book you into jail, they could use that information, find out what your sex is.
Also, just side note, Social Security cards do not have sex markers on them, but the Social Security Administration keeps that on the back end, and it is documented on the back end because that is then later tied to you have to register for the draft, which is associated with your Social Security number, and you cannot get college FAFSA, college tuition money if you don't correctly register for the draft at 18 as a male. I
Amended,
mean,
right?
yes, there are absolutely ways to move forward with this. What I think, again, is being left out of the debate here is not just the state of Kansas, but the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, the leadership in our political system should be having a conversation right now. Um, Where do we need sex markers? How do we keep sex segregated spaces that need to be sex segregated, like your jail, prison, sports? Um, I don't think we would be at this point where 1,700 Kansans got a letter in the mail if that conversation was being had by the Democrats 5 years ago. So,
All right,
any,
everybody. Are we ready to go over to our next segment where we talk to a journalist from Outkick magazine covering sports?
My psychic senses tell me that's going to be an excellent conversation.
Fantastic. Tune in next week to our new podcast, Tea Leaves and Tarot Cards. But for now, we're gonna go on to our second segment of the week, talking about sports.
if anyone has a tarot card deck that they feel particularly good energy around for me or Lauren that we want to get in Corey's hands, also let us know because I do want a tarot card reading.
We will also need some kind of bedazzled turban for Corey to wear for that episode. So please let us know if you could help us with that.
I've got one.
Oh, of course. So great. Wonderful.
Okay.
All right.
Need to see the bedazzled turban next week then.
Hello and welcome to our interview segment of Informed Dissent. I am Lauren Legere. Our co-host Jamie is running late. We have Corey Cohn with us and Dan. Dan, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself and pronounce your last name for me?
Sure, of course. My name is Dan Zaksheske. I'm a reporter for Outkick, and you can just call me Dan Z because I like to make everyone else's life easier.
Great. Um, well, you're here because you flew on our radar from your most recent article, but I want to kind of start at the beginning. I read your bio says that you were at ESPN for a
Yes.
while. Um, did you start noticing this issue of sex and gender in sports emerging when you were at ESPN? Kind of was there like a culture around it about how it could be discussed there at all? Like when were you first like, wait, what is going on here?
No, actually, I left ESPN in 2021. I was part of the mass COVID layoffs. I worked in radio as a producer. I don't remember this ever coming up at ESPN at that time. Again, I was in radio working on sort of very specific shows. Um, I only first became aware of it because of Riley Gaines, who, started becoming a major advocate and working a lot with Outkick. It was really like a lot of people, like most people, I think, Leah Thomas was really the intro to all this. I did not know this was happening. I did not know it existed until the, Leah Thomas thing happened. Um, and then one day my boss was like, hey, we need someone, because look, I'm going to be honest, like I never saw myself covering this topic. I got into this to mostly talk about professional sports, some big NFL guy. I do mock drafts and all that, like pretty typical sports guy. Um, but my boss sent me to cover a Riley Gaines event at Harvard. And it really opened my eyes walking around the Harvard campus and just seeing how at the time, this is kind of when the Palestine Israel thing was going on. And it was eye-opening to see how much more welcome on college campuses someone yelling free Palestine was than Riley Gaines, who was saying men don't belong in women's sports. I mean, she was a pariah on that campus. And I couldn't believe it, quite honestly. And it almost activated me a little bit. Um, I try to keep my biases out of it as a reporter as best I can, but I'm not going to shy away from the fact that my opinion is, males, men do not belong in women's sports.
Yeah. Did you get any, I guess from Outkick you didn't get as much protest for you wanting to cover this, but when you try to cover this, do you get some resistance? And where does that resistance come from? What does it look like?
Yeah, so I get my DMs often are not a fun place to be. And look, I never try to paint myself as a victim here. I'm not saying that in any way, but you asked the question, so I'll just tell. I mean, I get DMs, people telling me I should go kill myself. I get people telling me that I'm a pedophile. The first time I really encountered this in IRL, as the kids would say, in real life, is we covered this Michigan volleyball player. This was an athlete, born male, transitioned to female sometime. I'm sorry, transitioned to girl. Can't transition to female. Sometime around age 12 or 13. We were the only outlet that sort of reported on this. I got a tip early in the season, like, hey, there might be a boy on this girls' volleyball team. You might want to check this out. So we started following it. The team makes the state tournament, and the first round of the state tournament was held at their home gym. And so my Outkick sent me there to cover the tournament and, try to talk to parents from the other team, try to talk to administrators, what have you, report. And I was mercilessly harassed by the people in at Skyline High School. I mean, I had a gentleman standing behind me the entire game, just sort of screaming in my ear. He would follow me around the gym. There was actually a small group. A woman at some point accosted me and started, calling me a pedophile, essentially, implying I was a pedophile. Like, what are you doing at this girls' volleyball game? Do you have a kid on the team? You don't, do you? Like, you're just here to watch young girls. And it's like, okay. So that
Well,
was really, yeah, go ahead.
when you're there, I mean, were they just kind of objecting because obviously you hadn't written the piece yet, right? This is before you've written the piece. So were they just objecting to any journalist wanting to cover this as if like we just don't want eyes on this kind of thing? Or were they familiar
Well,
with your
I had been writing about the athlete without
okay,
actually attending the matches throughout the season.
okay.
And to be fair, the story was never, and I want to make this very clear, the story was never about this kid. I feel bad. We're
Yeah.
talking about a 17, 18-year-old kid who was, transitioned at 12 years old. Like, this is not the kid's fault. Okay. This is a failure of adults. And our story was essentially about Michigan, about the Michigan High School Athletic Association that had a very bizarre policy about needing a waiver to compete. And they were being cagey with us about whether or not that was even followed in this case. So that's what our story was about. Like, first of all, why does this rule exist? But even if it does exist, are they following it? And because we couldn't get answers because the school wouldn't give us any information, they just kept hiding behind, privacy laws, even though we were never asking to identify the student. I had several places criticize me and say, Outkick is harassing this kid. They've written 18 stories about this athlete. And I was like, I've written 18 stories about the situation. I've never once named the athlete. I never once showed a picture of the athlete. Other people named the athlete, but that's not my fault. I can't control that. It's going to happen. I mean, we can't just ignore these stories because there are kids involved. As much as we did everything we could to protect the identity of the child in question. But this was about process, procedure, and then was everything being followed? So they
What was
knew
the
what.
rule? What was the rule if I
So the rule in Michigan specifically is if you want to have a male to female compete on a girls team, you have to apply for a waiver basically at the beginning of the season, and then the athletic association has to approve that waiver in order for that athlete to compete in the playoffs, as it were.
not in the regular season, just like the playoffs?
No, it's no. It's weird the way high school sports work, but essentially the governing body really only has control over the postseason. Like they run all those tournaments. The regular
Okay.
season are sort of controlled by the schools themselves or the districts.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I feel like when the Leah Thomas thing broke for me, I had already kind of been talking about this for quite some time, but I thought surely this is going to make people wake up. And I think it did. So when you first kind of delved into this, were you, because so many people get into this and they're like, I'm just going to explain it and it'll be fine. Were you kind of one of those people that were like, I'm just going to say that this is crazy, and of course everybody's going to agree with me, and then you realized, wow, people don't actually agree with me? Or were you a
Well,
little more aware of what was going on?
yeah, so because I came into it, I guess you could call it a little bit later. As I mentioned, covering the Riley Gaines event, and I had already seen, some of the things that had happened to her. By this point, she had already gone to that college in California and had been, barricaded in a room and
Yeah.
held for ransom. So, no, I kind of knew going into it that there were going to be people who would object to it. I again always sort of assumed that it was just like online troll keyboard warrior types, which is why like I mentioned the DMs earlier, and every time there's like a big story I'll get 50 to 100 DMs, saying horrible things to me, but I was like, it's the internet. Experiencing it in real life at that Michigan tournament where I actually did have to call the police, um, just because I wanted to make sure that I wanted someone to walk me to my car. And I've had people even make fun of me for like, oh, big tough guy. Like you can, it's like, look, it has nothing to do with that. These people are crazy. That's what we've
Yeah.
learned. And this was, shortly after the Charlie Kirk situation. I don't know what they have planned for the parking lot. They clearly knew I was going to be there. They were ready for me to be there. They had this plan in place to harass me. Um, that's how uncomfortable I felt. And it just gave me so much respect for Riley Gaines because, as I mentioned, like I'm a guy, I'm a rather large guy. For her as a woman to be out there doing this and receiving 10 to 100 times the hate and, the threats to her physical safety, I gained a tremendous amount of respect for what she does.
Yeah. So as you're watching this kind of happen in sports, do you I kind of, this is kind of a chicken or the egg kind of question, but do you think that um it was the larger societal push that kind of pushed this into sports, or do you think sports just kind of became a flashpoint because it's so like illustrated what was going on here and how unfairly this really was and how kind of messed up the logic was behind it?
Yeah,
You
I
know what I
definitely think
mean?
more, yeah, I definitely think more the latter on that because I mean, look, most people I think believe that if you're over 18 years old and you want to have surgery, you want to take hormones, you want to do whatever, like go ahead. I don't care. This is America. You're free to do that. Um, but that doesn't mean you then get to infringe on other people's rights. Like, right? It's that classic thought of do whatever you want until it starts negatively impacting other people. Then we have to have a conversation. And sports is just such a clear delineating line of we have women's sports for a reason. There's actually, if you think about it, really no such thing as men's sports. There is the sport, which like women can compete in the NFL, the MLB. Like there are no rules preventing, but men can't compete in the WNBA. And the reason for that is obvious because if there were no women's sports, there would be no professional female athletes. They wouldn't be able to compete at that level. So I think sports is such an obvious for most people to be like, okay, look, yes, you can do whatever you want in your own time, do whatever you want in your bedroom in the privacy of your own home. But that doesn't mean you get to compete in women's sports. And then sports also brings in the locker room angle. So you had kind of two pieces here, which was the unfairness of competition. And then, traditionally in sports, you're changing in a room with your teammates. And now you've got males in women's locker rooms. And I think that's why sports became such an important flashpoint moment for people to stand up and go like, what is going on here? And then when you dive into it deeper and you start finding out this is happening in middle school and high school, that alerted people to, oh my God, this is happening to children. Like they are, putting these kids on puberty blockers, which, I'm not a scientist, not a biologist, but last I checked, puberty is pretty important and stopping a biological like I don't need a ton of science to tell me that stopping a major important biological process in a growing body is a bad idea.
Yeah, I've said that a number of times because we do often get bogged down with like all the technical medical information. But my reaction, I mean, years ago when I found out we were doing this to kids was like, no. Like it does seem like it's kind of common sense, but here we are. I want to touch on what you said about men's sports doesn't really exist. There's the sport and then there's a women's category because I think this last article you did, you're covering the Winter Olympics. The it was she was billed as like the first trans athlete competing in the Olympics. Can you walk us through that story? Like who is she? How did she qualify? Did she win? Um, how did this become even a story? Because, well, I'll let you go from
Yeah,
there.
so the athlete's name now is Elias Lundholm. She is a female skier for Sweden, and to be clear, this was billed as the first openly transgender Winter Olympian. We have
Okay.
seen this in the Summer Olympics. We saw it actually with an American runner named Nikki Hiltz a couple of years ago back at the Summer Olympics. So Elias Lundholm is a fascinating case study to me because here you have someone who is a woman who has not even undergone because of sporting rules. This person can't take testosterone to compete in the women's category. That would be considered a performance enhancing drug. So you have this woman who is a woman, is taking no testosterone, has had no surgical intervention, and just says, you need to call me he. You need to refer to me, I am a man, I am a boy, and you need to refer to me as such, which to me exposes the fallacy of this entire movement because we are constantly told when it comes to men competing in women's sports that we must let males compete in women's sports because we have to affirm their identity or we could have terrible ramifications like including but not limited to suicide. If you don't allow this boy to compete in this girl's sports, he might kill himself. Now, Elias Lundholm says, I'm a man. Why is Elias Lundholm comfortable competing against women? Why doesn't Elias Lundholm need to be affirmed by competing in the men's category? And the answer is pretty simple because as important as Elias Lundholm's identity as a man is to her, what's more important is winning. And Elias Lundholm isn't going to be able to compete against men. She could barely compete against women. She did not perform very well at the Olympics, had the worst run in the first qualification, and then I think ended up finishing like 22nd out of 30 women. So could barely compete against the women at the Olympic level, certainly could never compete against the men. And I think it forced people to kind of say the quiet part out loud, which is, okay, is this really about identity? If all of these men have to compete in women's sports for their identity, then how come it is? And we expose there's a rower for the University of Washington here in America, same thing, college rower, boy, he him pronouns, competes with women. So what you have for the women's category is you have women who identify as women competing as women. You have women who identify as men competing as women, and you have men who identify as women competing as women. Like it's become this weird catch-all category, whereas like the quote unquote men's sport is just men who identify as men. Period.
Yeah, no, I was just exactly. It's kind of like turned on its head what you said earlier is now there's the sport and then there's a men's category. It's pretty crazy. So I'm not a ski person. I don't know what she was in the moguls,
Correct.
which is that the one where they kind of race down and they have to do all the obstacles, or is it that the one where they're flying off a hill?
No,
Sorry, I'm
so
not a,
yeah, yeah, yeah. So the moguls is where they have like I'm not an expert either, but it's the moguls is the one where they have those little mini hills, and the kind of the key is to like be able to go over the bumps without like having your skis separate, and then they do two jumps. So you get scored on how fast you go down the track, how good your jumps are, and there's a bunch of aspects to it.
And what's the difference? I mean, if you don't have these statistics, that's no, don't worry about it. What's the difference? Like if they're you win based on speed and I guess some other category about your jumps and your skis. What's the like? How would you compare the ranking women versus the ranking men? Like you said, she was like 29 out of 30. Where would those 29 be in terms of the male sports ranking? Would they even be on the chart?
No, not even
Okay.
close.
Yeah.
Wouldn't even
So
there. It's that you can't compare them. I mean, look, we've seen this many times. Like we've seen the U.S. women's soccer team, the best soccer team in the world, lose to a bunch of 15-year-old boys in one city. I mean, I don't know how many times we have to go over this. Like we all know it. It's obvious. We talked about it. There's a reason the women's category exists. It's so women can compete in athletics, and allowing men and males into the women's category. At that point, you don't have a women's category.
yeah. So did this kind of like is this your beat or did this just kind of become your beat because did no one else want to cover it? Did no one else want to touch it? Like
Um, that's funny. I do cover quite a few things at Outkick. I would consider this to be my quote unquote main beat. No, most people don't want to cover it
yeah.
because of the things I've described, especially as a man. I have a colleague, Amber, who also covers this alongside me. And it is a little bit easier for her because, again, I understand the optics of a grown man going to a girls' volleyball, a high school volleyball game. That being said, we have covered high school sports as a society forever. And what is your argument that if, because people were like, you don't have a girl on the team, why are you here? Is your argument that if you aren't related to one of the players, you shouldn't go to a girls' high school sporting event? Like that seems pretty sexist. So we shouldn't promote these girls. It's weird to go to a girls' sporting event unless you are related to one of the players. Like what message are you sending there that the girls shouldn't be celebrated by adult men because otherwise they're creepy pedophiles? I don't even
Yeah.
understand that argument. But yeah, I mean, look, it's not a fun beat to cover. I'll be honest with you, it's not. But that it doesn't matter. And I'll tell you this: what makes it a lot easier is knowing with 100% certainty that you are on the right side. And there are very few issues in life where you can be
Mm.
100% certain you are on the right side, but this is one of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Where do you think where do you think sports goes from here? Like, how does this get ironed out? Because there's so many different governing bodies in sports, depending on which athletic it is, whether it's national, whether it's state, like you just said, it could be dependent on your school district. So I see in the future a lot of these things colliding because we are seeing a lot of states saying no men and women's sports. However, those same kids, if they're going to be playing on a national competition, are still going to be competing with states that have said, no, it's fine. This is great. These are girls. So how do
Well,
you see this
yeah.
all hashing out?
So, I mean, we've taken a lot of steps towards the light as a society. So the NCAA has finally said, no men in women's sports. So we really shouldn't be seeing any more D1 athletes. The Leah Thomases of the world should not exist anymore at the college level, which is obviously a huge feeder. USA Olympics or the U.S. Olympic Committee changed its policy, so you really can't, as an Olympian, you can't be an Olympic athlete. What's really left right now is sort of like you mentioned, the high school and younger, because it is left up to the states. At the national level, it's kind of gone. I mean, we've got the federal executive order. Like I said, the NCAA has changed its rules. The NAIA has changed its rules. The U.S. Olympic Committee has changed its rules. So I think, we're mostly covered for adults and when we're talking about elite athletics, either be top level college or Olympic sports. But it's these high school sports where I think we have to look into, because again, it is state by state, and you've got you had the trans pitcher in Minnesota dominating and winning a state title. You've got volleyball in Michigan. We're seeing it. AB Hernandez is back on the track in California, Washington. It's all the states you would think allow it, and they have been incredibly steadfast. The governors there have all said, like, you're attacking trans kids and all this stuff. So, I mean, that's really all that's quote unquote left. Now, the question, of course, is like, what happens once Trump's out of office and let's say a Democrat gets, elected in 2028, because that executive order, that's going to be one of the first things they wipe off the books. And then do you see the NCAA reverse course? Because they kind of said, hey, we're, federal law is this, so we're doing this. U.S. Olympic Committee, same thing. So do they immediately pull it back? So I think that is why this issue remains very important leading into 2028, especially like that first changeover from Republican to Democrat. If that happens, not saying it will, but if it does, what does the landscape look like once we get another Democratic president?
Yeah. Yeah. So I've heard there are some people who will say, well, as long as they're not competing in, like you said, elite sports, so college level or like professional level, it's no big deal. Um, I played sports all my life, and I mean, I remember from a very young age it becoming a very different game playing with the boys. Like whether it was soccer or I mean, I was a rough girl, but it still became a very different game. So, do you feel that there is a problem with opportunities for young girls? Because if you're in high school and there's no rules on this, doesn't that still eliminate elite or possibly, girls that could get scholarships if they're being knocked out of the high school running because there was a male competing against them at the high school level? You're still kind of taking opportunities from these girls.
Yes, and we're not even considering the girls who just flat out are like, you know what, I don't want to play sports because I don't want to have to deal with this. I don't want to
Yeah.
either have to sit out. I don't want to compete with a boy, but I also don't want to say that I don't want to compete with a boy because then I might be
Yeah.
called a bigot or a transphobe. So I'm just not going to play at all. So there's that aspect of it. And I'll just use the Michigan example as one, because a lot of people were like, well, it's volleyball in Michigan. They didn't even win the state title. They finished, in the top 8, but they didn't win. Like an all girls team won. So who cares? Well, there was a spot on that varsity volleyball team that did not go to a girl because it went to this boy.
Yeah.
And how do you think that girl feels? How do you think every team that they did beat in the state tournament, because they did finish in the top 8, I went to several matches that they won. How do you think every girl, I mean, the fact of the matter is, and I find this so interesting because they always say like, oh, it's it's just one kid. Like, who cares? Like, the amount of girls affected by just one boy being on a team, whether it's their teammates, their opponents, the girls were not even considering, the ones who maybe chose not to try out because of this, the ones who didn't make the team, the ones who didn't make the podium. One male on one girls team affects hundreds of girls. I mean, I covered Blair Fleming, who was the volleyball player for San Jose State, at the D1 level, probably one of the last ones we'll see, at least, because as I mentioned, the NCAA got rid of it. But, and when you started counting up like all of the people affected by that, because how many teams forfeited against that team rather than play, like how many girls lost volleyball matches, and, a lot of these girls, this was the end of their volleyball career. They're not going to go on to be Olympic volleyball players. There's not a lot of room for professional volleyball. Like, but they love it. And they've spent their whole life practicing and playing volleyball. And now they're just not playing volleyball games. Or all the girls on that San Jose State team whose senior season was absolutely ruined. All this joy was taken away from them. We spend so much time talking about the one male and how important it is for their feelings. And, oh no, they might get depressed or they might harm themselves. And we just spend no time talking about the women. And it's just so fascinating to me because a lot of this is coming from the radical left, which has always been, we are the party of women. You know, we got to knock down the patriarchy and the misogyny. And I get all of that. But isn't the most misogynistic view you could possibly have that men who say they are women have more rights, or that we should prioritize them over women when it comes to their bathrooms, their locker rooms, and their sports? I mean, it's honestly one of the most hypocritical positions that anyone could hold, that you are for women and you're also for, this.
Yeah, it's a tough barrier to get through because people will straight up tell you like, but trans women are women, and then
Right.
you're in this like cycle of a conversation where you're like, wait, what? We can't even agree on reality. Have you ever gotten the opportunity to speak to any of these boys? I'm assuming they don't want to talk to you,
Yeah, they don't. They do not want to talk to me.
but would you, if you had the opportunity, because you did actually mention, and I don't see this in a lot of critiques of the men and women's sports issue, but Corey actually does a lot of testifying in states to get some of these bans passed to get boys out of girl sports, and he does usually focus on the fact that like we are hurting these boys, like we are literally chemically castrating these boys. So I'm just curious if you had the opportunity to talk to one of these boys, what do you think your line of questioning would be? Because you do have compassion for these boys, which we do too. I mean, I think it's a
Yeah.
sin that they're being lied to and kind of used, but I'm just
Yeah,
curious.
so I have reached out to Leah Thomas. I did reach out to Blair Fleming. I have personally tried to speak with some of these. Now, I did not try to speak with the Michigan athlete because again, this is a child and I didn't think it would honestly be appropriate. People ask me, why didn't you reach out to speak to the mother? And my whole thing was, well, the story's not about the kid. Like I know you guys keep
Yeah.
saying that I'm harassing this kid. It's not about them. It's about, it's about the rules and whether or not whatever. Point being, I don't know what my line of questioning would be because I think the problem that we're seeing now is that these parents almost who have made this decision to do this to their children, they have no choice. Like they have to ride it out. I don't think you're ever going to convince one of these parents that they made a mistake because they would have to come to grips with the fact that, oh my God, I ruined my kid's life. And I think I don't know about you. I don't have kids, but if I honestly felt like, oh my God, I ruined my kid's life, like I wouldn't be able to live with myself. So I think as long as the parents continue to reinforce this, I think the kids are just living in such a delusion that it's almost not even worth it. And they're so bought into this idea and this cause. And it's like, I hate to compare it to this, but it's the only thing I can think of. If you're talking to someone with schizophrenia who says, like, hey, the table next to you is on fire, like you're never going to convince them that it's not.
Yeah.
We could have a logical conversation and I could put my hand on it and be like, but you're not going to convince that person that it's not. So I don't know that there's any value in that. Again, I think that's why we have to change the rules at both the federal and state level, at least for children, because I, I just can't see any positive coming out of allowing this in children at all.
Yeah.
When some of these organizations are affected by like the NCAA rules changes, do you hear from anybody and you're just not, there are things that you can't report because it's off the record? Like what sort of information do you have behind the scenes about how coaches or athletic directors are reacting to these types of policy changes?
So it depends. There are people totally bought into the cause. The San Jose State head coach, for example, when he had Blair Fleming on his team, was down with the cause and basically told the girls on the team, like, look, if you don't like this, that's a you problem. We saw this play out in real time because their assistant coach was eventually fired because she stood up against it and said, I don't agree with this. And she was kind of the sounding board for the girls on the team who were like, we are not in favor of this. We do not want our teammate to be a male. We feel like we're cheating. She ends up getting fired. So for the NCAA, like honestly, the NCAA is the most feckless organization you will ever come across. And I think for them, they wanted to ban it, but never wanted to have to take responsibility for it. So they were stoked when Trump signed that executive order and they could be like, not our problem. Hey, it's against the law, so we don't allow it. And I think that's honestly a lot of what you're seeing because as as much as these people who are for this are in the minority, they are loud. They are aggressive. They send emails. They show up to protests. Like they make their voices heard. And these big organizations are afraid of them. I know Tommy Lahren, who works for Outkick, is fond of calling it like the trans mafia. And honestly, it's a good description because they really do. Like they kind of threaten your business if you're not going to follow along with what we're saying. You are against us. And just like the mafia might call you up and be like, hey, something bad could happen to your store. You probably need some protection. Like you better pay or your windows are going to get broken. Like it's a very similar thing. So I think a lot of these organizations really just wanted the federal government to say, hey, this is against the rules. So they could say, great, awesome. That's on them. Has nothing to do with us.
It's crazy. I mean, you describe them as feckless, but it's like, who, I don't understand what the NCAA thinks is going to happen to them if they make a rule based on reality. Like, what? Is there another game in town I'm unaware of that does like? Aren't they the only ones making these regulations? I don't. It's such an embarrassment. I mean, how do sports is like the last truly merit-based thing we have. And if we're taking that away, I mean, it's very sad. It's sad for these boys. It's sad for these girls that are being excluded from their sports. And we are very grateful to reporters like you that are not afraid to talk about this because it is important. It's important on so many different levels. And I do think that sports is kind of like, I think Jennifer Say has called it the tip of the spear. It's what has gotten people's attention to kind of the even more like gross things that are going on with this movement. Corey, do you have any follow-up here for Dan?
Well, although this isn't really specific to the reporting itself, one of the things that we have seen, I say Lauren and some of our previous co-hosts, like Lisa Sellen Davis, who's been a reporter, Eliza, Sarah Mittermeier, for example, we have learned that it's really difficult for people in positions like yours, Dan, to report on these things because the social repercussions can be so difficult. Friends that no longer talk to them, or professional contacts who disassociate from them, opportunities that sort of dry up that they used to enjoy access to. Can you talk about how this beat affects you personally and professionally, generally?
Not great. Everything you mentioned is sort of true. When my name shows up on a, credential list for an NCAA event, it's like, oh, that guy. I gained kind of national fame when I asked Dawn Staley if she thought men should be allowed to compete in women's sports during the women's Final Four a couple of years ago. The NCAA was not psyched about that, as I mentioned, sort of the DMs. But here's the thing. It's mostly coming from people who I wouldn't associate with anyway, right? Because, people say like cut people out of your life, but like I don't really have anyone in my life who thinks men should compete in women's sports because that's just not someone I have anything in common with. Because if you believe that, I really don't think we could be friends. And I don't mean that in a way, I just mean like, if that's your line of thinking, like that's just not someone I would generally associate with. The people in my life, like I haven't lost any friendships over covering trans in sports. Like even the liberals that I know are like, hey man, like yeah, that men in sports thing, like. So like honestly, when people stand up there and say this is an 80-20 issue or a 90-10 issue, like it is. Ask people in your life. Like I am friends with Democrats, liberals, but they all draw the line at this issue. Like this is the one where they're like, yeah, that's absolutely absurd, especially the ones with kids, especially the ones with daughters. Now you find these crazy pockets. Like when I went to Michigan, I couldn't believe that there were so many people. I actually thought they didn't exist in real life. I'm being honest with you. I was like, this has to be like some kind of online troll game. Like these people can't actually exist. You can't really believe that, boys should be allowed to compete in women's sports. And so when I saw it in person at the Michigan volleyball tournament, I was like, wow, they do exist. Holy cow. But as far as my life, I mean, yeah, look, I'm never going to be hired at ESPN again. I can tell you that. Never going to be hired. Not that I would want to, but like, the New York Times is never picking up the phone and calling me. You kind of have to pick a side nowadays in media, which is kind of sad. But, I think everyone's kind of facing that. So I don't know. Again, this is not a woe is me either, by the way. Like I feel way worse for these women that I've talked to and these parents that I've talked to. And I'll tell you this, like I've had a couple stories where I interviewed parents and they told me these horrible stories. Like my daughter quit sports, like she was running and she just didn't want to do anymore. And I'm ready to blow it all up and I want to draw attention to this. And I'm like, great. And I've got this great story written, ready to go. And I get a call at the last minute from the parent that says, hey, you know what? Like I thought about it and it's not me. Like, I don't care. I'll lose my job. I'll lose my friends. But my daughter, I don't want to see her get punished at school or be punished by her coach. You got to pull the story. And I'm like, look, I get it. I've had it happen at least 3 times that I've been doing this, that I've had a story ready to roll and had a parent be like, you know what? It's just, I can't. I was mad. I wanted to talk about this, but I just can't. And I'll tell you one quick story about that. I was in Michigan and the team that lost to the team with the boy to go to the regionals, the parents on that side, I tried to talk to a few of them after the game, and one of them was like, I have to walk out of here or I'm going to say something I'm going to regret. And I thought he was going to like attack me. But what it turned out was his wife was like, no, we have 2 more kids coming. You can't say anything. He wanted to say, this is ridiculous. This is BS. I don't agree with this, but was so afraid that his younger daughters would then be ostracized from their community, from their school, from their friends, that he didn't want to speak out. And that's where it's become a real problem, because everyone says like, why don't the parents speak out? It's actually generally, in my experience, it's not because the parents are afraid at all and they're willing to give it up for their kids. They're protecting their daughters by not saying anything, because their daughters in a lot of cases are like, I don't agree with it either, but I just can't say it out loud.
Yeah. Well, we're very grateful to people like you who do say it out loud.
Yes. Thank you for that. I really appreciate this. And I love having these conversations because I do think it's important. And as I mentioned, I think this topic has unfortunately lost a little bit of steam because Republicans used it to win the 2026 election. And now it's not an election year. And that's kind of how politics go, sadly.
Yeah.
But I think, as I mentioned earlier, with 2028 coming, we need to get everybody on board with this. We can't just have it be, okay, the next time a Democratic president gets into power, he or she wipes out the executive order and we're right back to square one where the NCAA is erasing their rules and such. So I think it's important that we keep the momentum up on this issue until it is eradicated, which in my opinion, it should be.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you so much for listening this week. We hope you enjoyed the episode. As always, just to note, we are actually happy to accept all tarot cards. And I ended up having to ask Lauren how to spell tarot. She said it's like carrot with a T. So apparently, Lauren and Gavin Newsom share the same disability, but I personally believe she would make a better president. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, comment, and share. It really does help us grow. If there's anyone that you would like us to speak with, somebody you would recommend, or a guest that you want us to have, please let us know in the comments. We're always looking for great conversations. As always, stay informed and ready to dissent.